You're on.
We talked a little earlier, did the introductions. This is the fire department committee that was set up during the whole process of assessments and everything else. 3 in-house officials. And then one of our fire captains was also on the committee with myself. After everything went down, we found out the conditions our buildings were at and that repurposing them wasn't going to work. We set up a fire department committee. Fire department committee was set up with the fire chief, the same captain, firefighter Young, firefighter Kenworthy, and one other firefighter who was unable to make it today because he's at his other job. So that's who's up here. We've already met you guys. We have 6 questions we're going to ask. We'll go around the table, let each person ask a question.
Can I take 1 second to introduce the people on the phone?
Sure.
So on the phone with us is Robbie Krasnowski. His resume is in the proposals that were sent out. He would be the project manager from Five Bugles side. He has worked on pretty much every station we've done in the last 10 or 15 years now. He is our guru of what makes a good station a great station, all of the detailing. He'll be in charge of that side of it. Also on the phone is Jim Schmidt. He is a retired fire chief who works for us, and when we get around to introducing where Five Bugles comes from, you'll understand the importance of Jim Schmidt's role and his role as a retired fire chief working with us.
Okay, very good. Well, we'll start with the first question. And this is kind of redundant because we talked about this earlier, and that was why I was asking you. You guys are the architects and the builders. It's all one company. It's not 2 different entities. The first question was take a few minutes to tell us about each entity of the design build team. The builder was supposed to talk about the architect was supposed to talk about the builder to kind of let us know what the working relationship was. So I guess we'll take this opportunity for you guys to explain the Wendell with Five Bugles design, kind of like you did a little earlier.
Okay. The Wendell is about a 77-year-old company. It is primarily a architecture and engineering firm. We have all disciplines of engineering. Civil, structural, mechanical, electrical, all in-house. We also have landscape architecture. We have an energy group that does energy performance contracting. We call that Wendell Energy Services. And we also have a construction management group that does all of our construction activities. That is actually headed up by Mark. Five Bugles is a brand under Wendell that is really strictly doing fire station design. That's all they do. And it's a dedicated group of people that do that. Mike, I'll let you just expand on that a little bit.
So Five Bugles Design evolved out of a 15-year relationship between Steve Gosman, who was actually supposed to be here, but his travel arrangements wouldn't work, so I get to replace him for this particular purpose. Which, just a real quick side note, we really are somewhat interchangeable in terms of we've both been doing this for 30 to 35 years. If you put our resumes side by side, you're going to find some really interesting comparisons on the 2 resumes because until I joined Five Bugles, I would do studies and he would do the buildings, or he would do the building that I did the study for. We were competing against each other so much that finally we got smart and decided that it was better to just get together and do this because we both enjoyed doing what we were doing. But back to Five Bugles, the beginnings of Five Bugles, it's Steve Gosman and it's Ed Mashevsky, who was a fire chief. And those 2 did a project for Ed Mashevsky. And then they ended up doing another one for Ed Mashevsky. But the relationship between them, they realized that there was a lot of distance to be made up in the fire industry in designing fire stations. And they created Five Bugles Design to do just that, to design better fire stations. So it becomes what our name, Five Bugles. That is the insignia that a fire chief wears, and it is the basis behind how Five Bugles works, which is that every one of our teams has a fire chief. Jim Schmidt is still actually working as a firefighter. He gave up his chiefship in Marshfield 5 years ago and moved into a more rural community, and they sucked him in. So he's currently a volunteer firefighter in a smaller department, but he has 30 years of experience as a fire chief. And the other requirement that the fire chiefs have to have is that they must have done a project of their own at one point in their career. So we're bringing experienced fire chiefs who know how to run fire departments and how to build buildings to our team to help us in talking with the departments about what we're doing. And that's the genesis of Five Bugles, and that is how we work all of our projects now, is making sure we have that team of architects and fire chiefs to work with your department.
And the other side of this is that Steve Gosman is an owner of Wendell, as is Mark Molnar, as am I. So your team has owners of Wendell, and so we are all under one umbrella, even though we have different brands, but it's all one company.
Yes, we should be clear about that. Wendell purchased Five Bugles and made us a division of Five Bugles. It doesn't change anything about how we do what we do. Our brand stays the same, and we are now connected with Wendell, which brought us a whole lot more resources, particularly the ones we're going to talk to you about today, which is the ability to build what we design.
And I'll just talk about the build side, because we actually legally, as a design firm originally doing design, our clients came to us and really said, you know, you do a great job on the front end of this, how do you help us build it? Rather than go get someone else, what can you do to help? And that really started our construction company. And legally, architects and engineers can't build anything, and contractors can't design anything. So by law, we actually have to have a separate construction company. That construction company doesn't go out and build things for just anyone. We don't submit RFPs for new grocery stores or whatever. We focus on building stuff that our clients hire us to design. We are all one team. I sit very close to our I'm actually a structural engineer by trade. I sit very close to our engineers, I sit very close to our architects. We're all under one roof, so we're communicating together as a team. We're not two different companies. And the way we approach design build projects is really from more of a professional side, professional architecture engineering side. Not that I don't want to be the star of the show being the builder, but our focus is to make sure you get what you want, first and foremost. There's no corners cut during construction. There's no hiding the cheese and trying to figure out where all the money went. It's us working together as one group. It's one throat to choke. You don't have two firms that you have to worry about, that a contractor hired an architect or an engineer, or an architect and engineer hired a contractor. It's all one company, one happy company. Five Bugles is a part of that. Our construction division is also a similar part of that.
And one of the things that we do under our construction company is we do everything open book. So we share everything with you, you know, all of the financials, everything. There's nothing hidden.
That's your neck of the woods, and I have no interest in that.
And we'll talk more about costs, obviously. Plenty to talk about on costs.
All right, any questions, any thoughts on first question? Anybody else want to read it, or you want me to read them all? Okay. Change orders are inevitable, or unavoidable. What would you recommend to limit the requirement for a change order?
The threshold of the dollar amount, or?
Yes. Generally, change orders, and this may be from the design and the build teams when they're coming together, or I'm not sure if it even applies to the design build aspect of it. But that was one of the big concerns we hear, is the change orders are what really strike up or run up the tallies on the construction costs.
So we'll have an image, and it's actually very graphic. It's the image of somebody who has a little dinghy boat. That's kind of the base contract, and then the big yacht is the change order, as it's called. And I think our approach is to try and knock that out. And the way we approach our projects is, if we're going to design and build you something, our process is to get it right at the beginning, so that as you get further down the line, the chance for it to have change orders is minimized. The second part of it is we're the builders and the designers. I can't yell at Mike if there's something wrong with the design. We have to work together to figure out how to make sure that it's inside the price when you start. Because that's where the dinghy and the yacht come from, is the designer might have goofed, and now the contractor is gonna look at that as an opportunity to make some big dollars. We don't operate our books that way. We run an open book, as John said, an open book methodology where every red cent is fully understood. All the contracts are bid competitively, and then as we manage through, we have a reserve because no one can tell us that there won't be a problem with ground. In my experience in 35 years of building stuff, once you get out of the ground, if you got a good set of drawings and you got a good team, it's gonna, the amount of change orders is gonna be greatly reduced if you do a good job. You can never predict exactly with certainty that something's gonna happen underground. So we do recommend putting a little reserve aside. We usually use 5% plus or minus when we're in construction. The committees we work with, they have their own threshold of what they can approve and not approve. My sense is that they will generally be low dollar adds to the contract. They won't be change orders. They will be items taken out of contingency that aren't an opportunity for somebody to make a bunch of money on, because it's going to be priced internally with our contractors, and we're gonna drive the cost down so it's affordable and there's no hidden costs.
And the way this process works under our projects is we will work with you to determine what that contingency fund is early on. And if something comes up, we will price it, we will sit down with you, we will go through it with you and say, all right, here's the issue, here's what we think here's the options to fix it. And then we'd like to use the contingency, and then we agree that we're going to use that contingency. At the end of the project, any of those funds that are still remaining are yours. They're not ours. Under a traditional design build, those are, the contractor considers those profit. Those never go back to the client. Under our open book methodology, we're working with you every step of the way. Every change order, goes through that contingency bucket and is usually limited to whatever percentage we decide together is the right amount. And most of the time, I think I was telling you, Chief, earlier on, we had a project in St. Cloud not too long ago. It was 500. It was not a. It was a transit project, not a fire station. We had a $500 million contingency. We wound up $500,000. Yeah, $500,000. So $500,000 contingency. We wound up giving them back $380,000 of that $500,000. Wow. What we used because we had 55 days below zero temperatures during construction when we were outdoors trying to weld pipe. So what we did is we tented the entire property and heated it, and people were able to continue working. We brought that project in, on budget and within schedule, but we did use some of the contingency balance we gave back to them. So
had to be in Minnesota.
It was
St. Cloud, Minnesota. It's cold.
It was cold.
And the reason I ask about the change orders is from the time that the RFP was approved until now, the committee went out and they did tours of different newer structures. And that was one of the biggest things we heard is, yeah, it looks really pretty when they put it on paper and they set it in front of you. And they have the intention in the back of their mind, they're going to have change orders. And most of the issues were, again, I believe, again, not from the engineering field or build field, but I believe it was because you had the same thing with a design firm and a build firm, and they're both going, it's their fault.
And it's really making sure you have a tight design, which we do. We have a process through Five Bugles that is a really tight design process that you're involved in every step of the way. So you're familiar with the costs that we're building up. And at the end of the day, we're all comfortable that what we're getting and what we're paying for is correct, which makes it a little bit easier going into the build side of it. Now it's us managing, and we're the contracting firm, so we know, we've been at the table too, so we know what's going on.
One other thing about the dinghy and the yacht, and probably the experience you might have had, is the architects and engineers probably were directly contracted with the owner, and then the builder was probably separately contracted, competitively bid. So that separation of the two entities is really the primal cause of that issue. What you've decided to do here, and we applaud you for, is you've decided to bring them together. Every job I've ever done, I'm not just saying this because of anything other than the best jobs are the ones that have an owner, a construction professional, and a design professional all involved from day one as a unified team. Once you segregate designers, and they put a great set of drawings together, all pretty on paper. Well, at bid day, if you hand it over to someone who's never been involved in the job, and you say, give me your lowest price to build this, you've put them in the position where, well, number one, they gotta be competitive, so they're gonna give you the lowest price they can. Then they're gonna take 10 or 15% off of it, and they're gonna open the drawings and they're gonna flag all the pages where they think a boo-boo was made. That's where the yacht starts to be built. That process is not the process that we would advocate at all. In fact, we advocate getting the project aimed in the right direction, get you what you want, make sure we're on cost and we're on budget, and work together, hiring contractors that we can collaborate with to make sure we build what you want and not have change order, runaway change order issues. So it's really a different process, and we'll go through it in more detail.
Okay. Pretty simple question. For the past 10 years, have legal actions been taken against either in the design build team by any customer? If so, what was the result?
The vast majority of anything legal for us is almost always a third-party claim. And you probably have billboards with people on them, call 1-800, whatever. It's third-party slip and fall type things.
Okay.
I can safely say that from a errors and omissions point of view, or a client that was not happy, those do not exist. We've never been told, we hate you, you're fired.
So none of the customers have ever come back and said, this isn't what I
You're
asked
done,
for?
we're suing you.
Okay.
That's not the 77-year history of our firm. It's being in the construction industry and having, there are advertisements that say, call us and we'll tell you what your claim is worth. That's what's going on. It's third-party stuff.
Yeah, welcome
It's
to
not-
Michigan.
We have been successful in a lot of cases of getting the claim against us dismissed, because typically it's part of a shotgun lawsuit where they sue everybody involved. And
And for what it's worth, Five Bugles doesn't have anything pre-merger that would even fall into those categories.
All right, very good. The RFPs and RFQs that were sent out were based off of the wants from our department. Our department established the committee, which I told you about earlier, to determine the needs for a new building in the future. If awarded and based on their needs assessment, how long would it take to determine a practical ballpark price for construction? Let me define it a little more. The RFPs, RFQs went out with a 21,000 square foot main station, a 16 or 15,000 square foot substation, Taj Mahals that if I could get him to break open the checkbook, get her to break open the checkbook, I'd be okay with. But it's not feasible, it's not practical for our community. We're a smaller rural bedroom community. We had to come up with a more feasible design or more feasible space. So we were looking at smaller versions of what was sent out.
Chief, would that be considered like the pre-referendum work? Is that?
English.
Well, the work, obviously you have to do a certain amount of work and then go out for your referendum.
The millage.
No.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
so,
okay. I'm not
well,
gonna-
we were,
Makes
the
sense.
way we proposed that is, number one, we would do that at no cost
Okay.
first. We understand that was a topic that was discussed early on in the process, but the effort that we put into the proposal to date might not be, it was done in a vacuum, so
Right.
forgive us, we never actually do that. That was a very rare occasion that we design something and say, oh, here you are. It's a process, and Mike can tell you the process. I think if we're gonna start from day one and go through a process, it's probably 4 to 6 plus or minus weeks, maybe on the farther end of that, but I don't know if you've got a feeling.
Can I weigh in here?
Sure.
Because our process addresses this. We're going to talk about our process a bit, but Five Bugles Design has been doing fire stations, and we do nothing but fire stations for a lot of years. In our proposal, page 19 of the proposal, there's a list of 35 fire stations that we've done in the last 3 years. We have a really good handle on the cost per square foot of fire stations, especially new fire stations. That takes a lot of the challenges that remodeling costs bring into things. So in our first programming session, we're going to take about 2.5 hours. We're going to go through every element of the fire station and talk to you about what spaces you really need. You gave us a good start, but there's still some things we want to talk to you about that we don't think were in there that need to be in there. At the end of that 2.5 hours, we're going to know how big your fire station is, and then we're going to plug in our cost per square foot that we are really very confident of, and we will know at the end of the 2.5 hours what ballpark you're in for the cost. We don't want to keep going beyond that point if we're hundreds of thousands of dollars over whatever your budget is. It lets us stop right there and come back and say, all right, we're too big, or maybe we're too small, and we can put in some of the things that are on your want list instead of the need list. But our whole system is set up to be able to do that, because like I said, we don't want to keep going down a design path that gets us 2 months down the road and then have a cost estimate run and then have to come back and change everything. It just gets everybody's expectations up and then drops them down. We want to be able to start and keep a nice constant path moving forward.
So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is you take pretty much the RFQ that we sent out, then we have a meeting where we sit down and we get, in layman's terms, realistic based upon wants or needs that the fire department has determined they need for a new station. At that point in time, you're able to calculate through your clickety-clacking what
That's
comes
technical
out.
term.
Yes, clickety-clack is a very
It
technical
really
term.
is a great system. I envisioned that it would work with us sitting in this room with our document up on that screen. Jim Schmidt, who's on the phone, will lead a conversation. We start with the Apparatus Space. How many trucks do you need? What are the trucks? So that we know exactly how big your apparatus bay is going to be when the conversation's over. Then we move through apparatus support, and we talk to you about all of the decon spaces, all of the extractors, all of that stuff. We're going to have lots of conversation about all these rooms, and we know how much space it takes.
Hey, you brought up a
One
good
extractor, to do 2 extractors. We can put all of that in. One of us from Five Bugles is going to be sitting in the background while Jim is leading that conversation, filling in the blanks.
You
when
brought
it's
up
all-
a good point just a few seconds ago. We're going to ask you what kind of trucks you have and what kind of space you need for an apparatus bay. And when this building was built back in the 60s, a fire truck was nowhere near the size that a fire truck is nowadays.
Correct, and
So-
our average, we start at 18 feet wide,
Okay.
and we start with 90-foot double deep bays. But we're gonna ask you, before we even get here to do this, we're gonna ask you for a list of your trucks and the sizes of those trucks, and we're gonna ask you if you've got any future purchases that you're aware of. If you're gonna be buying a ladder truck, we wanna know 100-foot stick or whatever it is, just to make sure that we've got the spaces. But we know what it takes. We know that an engine needs a space that's 18 feet wide by 45 feet long. It's already set up in the system. So if you tell us you've got 2 engines and a tender and a ladder, then we know that that's going to come out to be 3 or 4 bays. It'll be how we talk to you about. That's what we talk to you about. Are they all going out straight? Are we double deep? Can we point in both directions? That's what we're talking to you about. And then when we're done with that, we will know how many square feet. And within a few hundred square feet, we'll know. And that tells us how many dollars per square foot, or that times our dollars per square foot of the last, averaged out of the last 5 we did or whatever, gets us a number. So we know whether to keep going or whether to go back through the list and go, wait a minute, that usually training room. Usually your training room wants to be big enough for your entire department, and then everybody says, gee, we'd like to be able to host regional trainings. What if we added 25 people to that thing? And then if we're too big and it doesn't make sense, we can right there come back and pull things back out.
Based upon your last statement, you stated that your square footage that you use. Now, I did notice over these last 3 years that all your builds have been in Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota, so on and so forth. Is that going to create an issue, since there's nothing in here that is from Michigan, and I'm sure the price per square foot in Illinois, Minnesota, Wisconsin is different than it is here in Michigan.
That's where I come in.
Okay.
Thank you.
And we actually have we have all in-house estimates done. In addition to the database they have, we actually do the estimates in-house. And whenever we do our own in-house estimates, we always want to find out where market conditions are with whatever place we're going to build. And that's getting the community to help us understand what general construction costs are, mechanical, electrical. So it's not done in a vacuum, kind of in our own little box. We get real-time contractors to help us provide good direction. And in a design-build project like this, we would start getting contractors involved in the design phase intentionally to help us better target that. We'll always do kind of an in-house check to make sure we're going in the right direction, but you can't replace market conditions. I mean, right now with the tariffs and steel and all that, it's just, things are happening. So that's ever changing. So basing it on something that's in, a different state really isn't the right thing to do without a data point that tells you what the local market condition will.
And although we haven't built a fire station here, we have done other projects in Michigan as well. We have a whole listing of
Okay.
projects.
Okay.
We're not unfamiliar with.
This is a reinforcement for you guys. I used to be in the contracting business, and when I would do my bids, I had developed a database, and you could look at the database, and at first when you do it, you start to go, these numbers working really real, but you would cross-check in 3 different directions to see if those standards you set to do your data worked. And in every case, I got to the point where I could depend on exactly what you're talking about. You know that your numbers are right, yet you don't stop there, you go back and you cross-check it. And it isn't effective.
So yes, you're catching actually some of the magic behind the screen here, which is that we would before we came here to do yours, double check against recent fire stations built in the area just to make sure that we weren't out of whack with our cost per square foot versus yours. Good catch. Thank you.
So, we got one, you said about 4 to 6 weeks to get it,
Yeah.
and then you said a 2.5 hour, give or take, after review meetings, so what would the ballpark estimate?
So I never did get to finish that.
Yeah,
Thank you. Is it that gets us that
Yes.
starting number?
Uh-huh.
And then, it is, so then the first phase would take us about 30 to 60 days. At the end of that, we'll still be using cost per square foot numbers. And another 60 days later, then we'll be talking about detailed cost numbers. So if you're talking about the number that you're gonna give to the public, that's gonna be out there at his number. If you're talking about the number that we're working with to make sure that we're designing what you want, need, and can afford, we're gonna know that the first day.
So both answers were valid.
Okay,
Mine come after his 1 day.
So, yeah,
so in total, about 4 months,
for
To
the
get
and
to-
then 20 days?
for the detailed
Okay.
cost per everything, the line item breakdown.
Yeah, actually, the way that we broke our schedule down here, and myself and Steve kind of cooked this together, so apologies,
I
Mike.
don't know.
But once we have that establishment of kind of the directional cost, which was, I was talking about the cost. The directional cost is gonna come out of that first meeting, and then we're gonna know what direction we're going. As we start to do more design and we refine the costs, that's about a 4 to 8 week period where we can actually say, that's what we call our preliminary design phase. And that's the phase that kind of locks us into how big is the bread box, where are we price point, what's it going to take to schedule and construct it, and make sure that we've got all that under in a nice bow, and that's where you can present that to the community, and that's where you can get your funding from. It would be impossible to do that in one sitting, so the refinement of the work we get in those initial settings will get us to 4 to 6 weeks where we will be able to say, this is what this project costs. It's not complete design. Percentage-wise, what would you say? 20 plus or minus percent? We can really get a good idea on what it's going to cost, 20, 30% of the design being complete, and make sure we're on track. Then funding can be obtained. Then the final design, where there's not risking the entire design, then you can proceed with the final design. Our design phase is about 6 months in its entirety. But that first piece is probably 4 to 6 weeks, as Mike said.
I think that probably to help answer the question here is, for public purposes, you would have conceptual designs that are as near possible to the final design, that would then have some numbers that would attach to that you'd take out to the public and say, here's what we're proposing to do, just like that picture right there. It may not end up exactly like that, but the public could say, oh,
Usually when
that's what
we're,
we're gonna get, more or less. And it's
Usually-
gonna be more or less this amount of money, and
usually when we're about 30%, which is where you're there, everything is pretty locked in and defined. It's from 0, that initial date, to 30%, where a lot of refining takes place. And you start to really focus in on the systems, the finishes, the materials. When you get to that end, that's when, by and large, we like to freeze everything. That's where the decision to go is made, if it has to scale back, whatever that needs to look like on that day. But once we kind of fire the gun, then we're proceeding with the design. And turning back after you fire the gun is harder to do, because you've made a lot of advancements in the work, and doing a U-turn just messes that all up.
Yeah.
We like-
That first phase is critical that we're all on the same page.
that's where it's gonna be metal, brick, paper.
Exactly.
What's it gonna be built
Decision
on?
choices need to be made and locked in by that time.
Which gets to our next question. As I mentioned earlier, we're currently a month behind our anticipated schedule. And the anticipated schedule was for an August vote for a millage. That documentation has to be into the county by,
Well, we have to set our language at the May board meeting, the second Wednesday of May, so May 15th.
So you basically have a month.
Guys are
Basically,
looking scared.
now, this is not a bond millage that we're talking about going for. This would be a millage that would include buildings and some truck purchases, so we don't need a firm number. You know.
Well, this is.
Yeah, we're
this-
expecting it to go up, be an ongoing capital
This
millage.
is perfect, because what we'll do is we'll have those numbers that we started with at that very first meeting, and we'll have had enough time to, perfect is maybe another word. We'll have had the opportunity to vet some of those numbers a little bit, talking to you, with the chief and I were talking about what kind of roof are you putting on it. We'll be able to talk through a little bit of that. We'll have enough time to shape the number. Would it be the final number? No, but it would, like you said, it would be the ballpark number that we would all together feel comfortable putting in front of the public.
And that would be kind of an all-in budget, I think, is what you're saying, right? Kind of what would be the bond vote if you were going
That's
to
what
go
we're
for that.
looking
So
for.
that,
Yes.
we're very used to putting those front-end
Okay.
numbers together. And obviously, at that point, we want to be conservative, but not over-conservative and scare people. But I think we'd be able to help in that kind of time frame.
Okay.
I'm gonna ask a rather odd question here. What if there was a facility that you've already built that fit our needs?
You know, that is a question that happens quite often. And generally, what ends up happening is that it doesn't quite fit your needs. And we end up having to twist it, turn it,
Land it,
flip it
yeah,
around, shrink this piece, grow that piece, and the next thing you know, you've pretty much started over. So the answer is that, yes, there's probably something very close to something we've already done, which is why we know so much about being able to handle our cost per square foot. We know when we do those numbers and we look at the total, and we can go back and go, all right, we know how big your community is, we know how many trucks you've got, we know how you run your department, and we can look at that number and go, yeah, that makes sense to the last 3 stations we did of about that size, that it should be X number of square feet. So we're really good with that.
Okay, that's a perfect answer, because
But
I would go
we
through
don't-
that myself. Somebody say, well, you already have it on the computer, why can't you just cut and paste? It doesn't work that way.
it doesn't quite work that way. It
Right.
never has.
That's why I asked it to see if.
We've tried in the past to convince ourselves that you can do it, but, I don't know, the next thing you know, you got a 3-foot difference in the site that you gotta make up, so somehow the front entrance changes, there's always something that's different from station to station. But yes, we get a lot of our knowledge from the fact that we've done a whole bunch of 3-bay stations, and a whole bunch of 5-bay stations.
Okay.
There isn't that much difference between how they go together, but the front door will want to be somewhere different, like I said, or the front of the building needs to face a different way, or it wants to sit at an angle. There's all kinds of stuff that gets in the way of just picking them out of the book and going, we like that one.
Any additional questions? We're not going to do question 6 because we're at 30-minute time period.
Okay.
Interview process was set up for 30 minutes of questions, 30 minutes of the presentation. Any other questions anybody has?
You're not gonna do 6.
No, for any of them,
What's that?
for anybody.
Okay,
So everything's consistent
all right.
and standard. So we'll turn the floor over to you guys.
Again, we want to thank you for the opportunity. The opportunity to present to you. Okay, just a little bit, quick overview of Wendell. Again, architecture, engineering, planning.
I'm sorry.
Interior design, landscape architecture, a whole list on there on the right. Highways, rail, bridges, public transit. We have 13 offices. We work in 38 states and have 270 employees currently. Five Bugles design, 200 plus stations, 35 in the past 3 years. In-house fire service specialists, current on emerging trends, credibility, judging, writing, speaking, all about fire stations. Project team, Gerald Summy and myself are project sponsors. I'm co-sponsor. Design will be led by Steve Gossman, who will be the principal in charge from Five Bugles. He is also an owner. Mark Molnar is the project manager as well as the construction manager. And then you can see the other members of the team, including Jim Schmidt and Robbie listed there. Referendum services, Mike?
So referendums are important to start thinking about, said that backwards. It's important to start thinking about referendums at the very beginning. You want to make sure that what your fire department is asking the community for aligns with the community's needs. This isn't about building something for the fire department. We're building a fire station for the community, and it's important that we set our documentation up from the very beginning to sell that. So it probably means doing something as a facility assessment to be able to say to the community, this is why this building doesn't work for you anymore. And to be able to document that, because people are going to ask those kinds of questions. We have done quite a few referendums over the years, and we've been quite successful at them. Jim Schmidt, it's another reason we like having our fire chiefs as part of our team, is that Jim Schmidt will be available to assist your team with doing things like having conversations on the radio, television, talking to the newspaper and stuff, bringing another level of expertise to the community that people will recognize as an expert, rather than having the architect telling them they should be building this thing. It'll be another fire chief bringing that opinion as well.
And understanding of project needs, and I think this is the process you were alluding to, Mike. You know, it's a pretty well documented process. So.
We covered this quite a bit already. That's the document that I was talking about, where we're going to sit down and program, and that at the end, it all totals up for us and gives us that square foot cost that will let us be able to help you with that pricing issue early in the process.
And so it's really a facilitated design process right at the very beginning. Okay, Apparatus Space.
So the next couple of slides are just us showing some expertise that we have. Like I said, we've been doing this for a long time, and we have a few things that we know are important to get right in your fire station. So the vehicle exhaust systems, you don't currently have any of that, and you can go out in that apparatus bay and you can just smell the exhaust fumes out there. Those exhaust fumes are part of what's driving the cancer issues in the fire service now. So getting exhaust, capturing that exhaust and getting rid of it. We really like a lot of natural light in our apparatus space. That way you don't have to have lights on all the time. People can work out there and move through it. There's an awful lot of lights that have to come on every time somebody goes in and out of that apparatus bay. If you can get the natural light, it makes a much better working environment. in our environment, we prefer in-floor heat. It's one of those things that we'll have to talk to you about in terms of cost. It's a little bit more costly than the units that hang up in the ceiling, but it gets all the heat down at the floor where the trucks are. It dries that floor. As soon as the trucks are done, the water comes off of them, and that heated slab will just dry your floor right up. And the center trench drains that get the water off the trucks and runs it right to a point for runoff.
And day room?
Another element. So each one of these, by the way, is a page in a subject that we deal with in that programming document. So we're going to go to living quarters. We're going to talk to you about your day room. They're really important in the fire service. They're generally the social center of the fire department. It's where the guys hang out. It's where you develop the camaraderie, the team that is part of that team effort they're going to do. You get a lot of that from that socializing within the day rooms. Kitchens are incredibly important. We came in during the lunch rush with the whole department trying to move around in this little galley kitchen over here and everybody fixing their own lunches. But if you've got a duty crews or you're planning on duty crews or going to a full-time, we understand the need for the 3 refrigerators so that you can have one for each shift, because otherwise shift A is always complaining that shift B used up all their ketchup or whatever. But we like the 3-bay sinks so that you can have multiple people doing the dishes every night. This is much more of a bigger kitchen that's set up for career departments, if you will. Although this is from a volunteer department that we just recently finished. In fact, you'll notice there's no dishwasher in there. The chief decided he was not going to put a dishwasher in. Everybody eats together, and then they do the dishes together afterwards as part of that team building exercise. Our living space, our living quarters. We've developed these pass-through lockers that allow, that you see in this image. It allows the firefighter who is on duty to be able to get at his gear while a firefighter who is sleeping is still in his bunk, so that you don't have people going in and out of rooms all the time. It allows for a much nicer, much better sound quality between the hallways and the guys in their sleeping quarters. But it's all lined up so that you go right from these sleeping quarters through that door at the end and out to the trucks. Another thing that I've mentioned this a few times, cancer in the fire industry. I did not get a chance before the discussions here to talk to the chief at length about this, but I'm assuming that you've been having meetings with your firefighters about this issue. What they're finding is that you can just look around in this room. There is nothing in this room that is natural. If this place caught on fire, it's nothing but man-made materials everywhere, and resins and chemicals. It's settling onto the firefighters while they're in the field. They're working hard, their pores are open, and it just sucks right into their skin. We've got a system that we've set up. It's part of that programming document to walk this through with you. Can we go to the next slide? Best practice in the industry is becoming to set up a hot zone where the contaminated equipment is, and a cold zone, which is all the living quarters and offices, and to create a process that transitions you from that hot zone over to the cold zone, moving you through gear cleaning areas, and then through personnel decon spaces where we have individual, gender neutral, steam shower bathrooms. So a room that a firefighter can go into when he comes back from the fire, strip out of the clothes that he had under his PPE, put all of that into a wash machine that is just for that purpose. They can sit in a steam room for 10 minutes, soak sweat the chemicals out of their bodies. And if you don't think this works, go to a swimming pool and get out and sit in the sun. Your skin will be dry and itchy in 10 minutes. And that's dry and itchy because all those chlorine crystals are in your skin. Go sit in a steam room for 10 minutes and then sit in the sun, and you will not be itchy because all that chlorine has been sweated out of your body. I'm a swimmer. I swim every single day. And I was just amazed at the connection between that and this. You don't smell like chlorine. You spend 10 minutes in a steam room, you will not smell like chlorine the rest of the day. You skip that step, you go home and everybody in the room, in the house is just gonna be complaining because you smell like chlorine. It's that same process. You gotta sweat the chemicals out of your body. Training is a big part of what we do. It's very easy. You have hose that you gotta dry. You have a hose tower that you're drying it in. To expand that hose tower to provide the maximum amount of training is a very easy thing to do and a very low cost thing to add all kinds of training. Just a simple manhole cover in a stair landing, a standpipe that is not connected to the building's sprinkler system, but is a standalone standpipe with a fire department connection on the outside, a sprinkler head on the inside. All those things are just really cheap, easy things to add that add a ton of training. And we go through, we'll have a meeting where that's all we talk about is what training elements are we adding to your project to satisfy your needs for anything special you have in your community.
One of the things we wanted to talk about is, building these buildings and how do we do on budget. And we're gonna go through a few. This was Chippewa Falls Fire Department. The staff estimate was 3.8 million. The project came in at 3.7, and it was on schedule. Ashland Fire Station, 4.1, came in at 3.8, and that was completed on time. Janesville, 9 million, came in at 8.8, and was also completed on schedule. And Verona. And again, what it is it's the processes that we've set up that allow us checks and balances as we go through this, all the way through the design phase and into the construction phase, to make sure we're staying on track and within budget and schedule.
I also want to say that if you, I'm not going to make you back up.
No, I did.
Well, so Verona has a .com company in town that pays them a whole lot of money in taxes. And they wanted a building that said, we are an affluent community. And that's where we end up with that building. And if you think back to the other slides, some of them are less. It's something we're going to talk to you about in the design process. If we did the cost per square foot, you're going to see that each one of those buildings had a progressive cost per square foot to it. Right. So I said earlier that we have a cost per square foot of what we think a decent station is. We're not just going to go with that and say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk to you by showing you pictures of some of these projects and say, all right, is this what you see your community being? The chief talked about not liking flat roofs, pitched roofs. Well, if we're going to go to a pitched metal roof, then we got to add a few, dollars per square foot to what we're doing. But we'll have talked about that with you. We're not just saying that these are all we do. Are these brick and stone kinds of projects? We also have
but again, you look at Chippewa Falls. That came in at 3.7, and that's a beautiful functional building.
That's
you
a
don't
huge
have to
building.
spend $9 million
right
on a fire station.
It doesn't have the overhangs. It doesn't have the pitched metal roof.
But it still has the tower for training. It still has a lot of the other functions that.
That's why I think the numbers are gonna be different than what I think.
But like anything else, if you want to spend a lot of money, you can.
No problem.
Our job is to try to work with you to make sure you're spending what's necessary. Master builder approach, one of the things that we really wanted to hit is on this side, and I'll let Mark speak to this one.
So the whole master builder concept for us is really a return to our roots as designers first and builders second. And I'm a builder now. I was a designer for many years. I actually started out as a structural engineer and worked my way through engineering and then became more involved in construction, and now I run our construction side. The master builder approach is really us returning to our roots, designing and building things for our clients under one roof. And we have kind of blended what we call the best of both worlds. Folks are understanding of the traditional design, bid, build process where owner hires an architect or an engineer to design something. They put it out to bid, contractors are hired and they build it. They're not on the same team, they're different entities. The design-build approach, which is what you've asked for here, is where those are combined. What our master builder approach does is we try to combine the best of those two worlds. And in the conventional world, competitive pricing, getting what you want in terms of being able to work with your architect and engineer and get a design that you're happy with and that it meets your budget intents, are combined with the benefits of design build, which allows things to take place rapidly and enjoy the collaboration of architects, engineers, and constructors working together instead of being at odds with each other. So what we've done is we've kind of trademarked that for ourselves as the master builder approach, because we are truly trying to meld those two worlds together. There's negatives of each of the worlds. What we're trying to do is bring the positives together to really make a better product for our clients. And the first one is, I'll go to this first bullet point, I'm sorry, John, go there. The single point of contact, we kind of joke a little bit about it. It's one throat to choke. You really only have one entity you have to deal with. There's not an architect and an engineer saying, oh, I didn't know that contractor was going to do that. And contractor's not saying, well, if you would have just done a better job designing it, we wouldn't have these problems. It's all happening together as one team. A consistent team is important. I've done projects where it's kind of a revolving door. I got this person for this part of the project, then another person comes along. That's not how it operates here. We are not the sales team. If it isn't clear, we're not professional salespeople. We're doers. We actually participate in our projects from day one. A consistent team is important to you because all the knowledge that's developed over a project, you don't want to fade away when the construction team comes in. You want that team to be the same as the design team, or at least have the same consistent leadership. We've got people who are really good at building stuff. We've got people who are really good at designing stuff. It's the leadership group that runs both of those that's consistent all the way through. Accelerated schedule, I'll point to a chart here soon. But when we're doing design build and architects and engineers and constructors are working together, we can generally make things happen faster. And I'll give you the secret ingredient one in a second. Step delivery approach is important because in a traditional project where you just hire an architect and engineer to build you or to design you something, you go through phases of the project. 30% done, is it good? Yes, we like it. Okay, go to the next phase. And so on and so forth. That step delivery process ensures you as an owner have control of the process. If you simply hand it off, okay, you guys take care of this and let us know when you're done, you can lose control of the quality, you can lose control of the budget, and lots of other bad things happen. Competitive local subcontractor pricing is important because if we execute a design build agreement, it's not, okay, this price covers it, we'll kind of take it from here. We actually pledge that every one of the packages we put together will be competitively bid. And that actually is a good thing because competition will drive the prices down. But what we do is we break the project up into specialties. You have the HVAC folks, the electrical folks, the plumbing folks. When a general contractor hires all of them, they're really just kind of brokering and managing things. But what we try to do is competitively bid to 3 or 4 qualified HVAC contractors to get the best HVAC price. We do that with each one of the packages and we combine them together as one project that has the efficiency of being competitively bid as a whole. Not as one contract, but as multiple smaller contracts being competitively bid. Open book is, again, just not common in the industry. It's kind of, it's my money, I'm going to hide it. Well, we don't treat it that way. This is your money, your constituents' money. It is not ours. You're entrusting us to make good use of it from a design point of view and a construction point of view. We want to make sure you understand what that is and we work with you to clearly understand that. Return of unused project funds, again, it's not common for people to kind of say, okay, here's the money that's left. What else can we do? Maybe that goes to a new piece of equipment. Maybe it goes to adding something into a room like the furniture that everyone always forgets about. But it's your money and you're able to use that without us saying, well, it's our new source of profit. The schedule that we're talking about here is important because in a traditional environment where you design it, you bid it, you build it, things happen linearly. What we're proposing we would do here to help get it done quicker is that first concept phase there in the lower box. That's kind of that first 30% where we get everything locked in. And once we're locked in, then we can kind of put on the after jets, if you will, and design it and construct it in an overlapping fashion such that we gain schedule by not doing it linearly. And I want to make sure everybody's understanding of that. So our next slide is actually the slide we put together for the schedule on this project. And what this is basically I broke the project up into 3 sub-projects, preceded by the design phase. And the first bar on top is about a 2-month bar of that preliminary design where we get to 30%, we lock everything in. You say you're happy, we go fast after that. The second bar is the bar that represents the time duration for the design phase. We have 6 months, it's plus or minus 6 months. I'll say that off the bat. What we will do after we get into the project enough and Mike defines what the materials are, how big it is, we can very quickly do what I would call our first bid package, which would be maybe the site work, maybe the utilities, possibly the foundations. Those can be bid because Mike's locked in the project. We know roughly what the foundations will look like. Let's get those out to bid and have somebody start building those faster. The next thing would be what I would label the second bid package. It's another line that starts about 4 months down from when we begin the project. Again, in this instance, it's the steel structure. It could be the facade, it could be the roof. But it's another package of work that can be built onto the first package and allow us to keep building momentum, designing and building at the same time. And then we finalize the project with all the interiors. Sum total is we could probably, I'm guessing we'll probably save 3 to 4 months of an overall project if we're able to overlap these phases together, which we've done on many projects and it's very successful. It's not something that's not commonly done, but it gives you the advantage of securing a project in a faster time without sacrificing the quality. The cost control, I think this is, I want to start with the visual here because it's important to know what it means when we're going to return money. And the first box we have here is a typical project where you bid something as a hard bid to a contractor. What they're going to do is they're going to say, the dark color, well, that's all the contracted work. That's the concrete, it's the steel, it's the hard costs of the work. The next color is what we call the soft costs. It's the design fees, it's the construction management fee, it's things like having restrooms on the site, what we call general conditions. Soft costs, it could even be the cost that you need to finance it or your attorneys. Those are soft costs. On top is a contingency. And if we had a situation where we had a hard bid early on in a project, that contingency is going to be bigger because people know a little less about the project early on. So they're not going to take all that risk and say, well, I'll guess it's this. But what they will do is they'll put a little bit of fat into their bid, and that fat becomes the secret source of their potential profit on the project. What we're trying to do is, in the second column, is create an open book environment where we will competitively bid the work, the contracted work. That's the darker box. The next box is pretty much the same in each environment, the soft costs. It's what we're going to have to pay the architects. It's what we'll have to pay our contractors. Where we get into the real...
Sorry.
What we will benefit from is our cost savings ends up being...
It is,
Very good.
yeah, 217, Bob.
My apologies.
No problem, no problem. Actually, that's what we should do if that happens. But so where the cost savings comes in is in that managing of the contingency, the order contingency. Everybody needs a fund to fund something in case something happens. The good news is that's your money, it's not our money. We're not going to put that in our pocket, we're going to give that back. Whatever's not spent is yours, and that's important.
And everything that is spent out of that is with your approval.
The next slide is really a slide that we did that,
You know, based upon the information you provided us in the request for proposal, so your wish list, we kind of went through and developed this. So this is what we think that wish list and the renderings that we gave you would cost. Obviously, you know, through those meetings that we'll have going through our processes, we'll determine what your actual needs are. And so that will be different. So this is just based upon what we originally were told. It can change, you know, based upon what we determine the needs are.
and this is what I would call kind of an early estimate, similar to what Mike will probably have at the end of that first session. And it's based on dollars per square foot. Anybody who's been involved in home construction or whatever, generally things are built on a dollar per square foot basis.
Yeah.
And different building types have dollar per square foot ranges that are in that reasonable range. So what we tried to do, and Steve and the rest of the folks, we talked about what those might be, given some of our experience in these. And these are not meant to be bids, they're kind of placeholders for now, based on the design that we came up with, without any of your input. And what John said is we're just applying costs that are kind of what we would see as reasonable. They could be on the high end, they could be on the low end. We just said, here's kind of where we are in terms of dollar per square foot. For the site work, we really just, we took a total guess. We understand, we don't know if the sites have been selected at this point. We know during the RFP phase, they were still being looked at, and we kind of generically put information into our budget as you asked. And that's all we've done as a placeholder based on just our experience working on these kind of projects. And then all the other factors that add up to a project are below, what I would say below the line: the design fee, the overhead, the general conditions, construction management fee, bonding. Bonding is an important one because I think we had a discussion on bonding, Chief, at the beginning of the project, and we fully intend on bonding the project. But there are ways of saving money on the bonds too that we can talk through, and given this is a municipality, we want to understand, you know, the way to do that, because we could look at that a little differently. A contingency set aside, we put an allocation in for FF&E, because that sometimes is forgotten about, and we came up with, you know, these two stations together, maybe 13 on the high side. I think we were saying 11 to 13 based on the design we did in a vacuum without your
And based on the information you provided us.
Right.
What's FF&E?
Furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So
Okay.
tables, chairs.
If you picked your building up and shook it,
It would fall.
everything that falls out is FF&E.
Yeah, there's some of this equipment I know that you guys have is sentimental. And we want to consider.
We'll have to find a place for that table.
Oh, don't get me started. Actually, the table is coming, just the top though, and anyways.
And the important thing to note is, and this is, it can be kind of Greek, but what we want to do is help you understand all of those costs in explicit detail, and that's what our obligation to you would be.
And, you know, we'll be sitting side by side selecting that stuff. So, I mean, and you'll understand what it is that it's costing. So with that, you know, we did have some preliminary designs, and this was based upon the information you provided, and pretty much contains most of the areas that Mike has already discussed in the designs. Obviously, these will be refined, you know, if we're selected to proceed. But that's kind of what we came up with at this point for what Station 1 could look like. Really, it's a two-story building. And
It's like the upper deck.
what's that?
I like the upper deck there.
Do you want to
The
comment
hot
on
tub.
design?
What
the way that you guys-
the
That's a patio too. That they could run.
It's a party deck, that's what
Party
you
deck, yes.
well, what we've been doing a lot lately with any of our fire stations that have living quarters in them is generally stacking them into two-story buildings, because it gets those living quarters as close as we can get them to the apparatus space, and it lets us get the office areas and everything also close to the apparatus space, so it just kind of condenses the floor plans down. There was a department down in Texas, I think, who actually did a study and figured out that it was adding like 6.2 seconds or something to get from the living quarters to the apparatus space, because the stations were just getting more and more spread out with all of the decon stuff. Specifically, that's what they were talking about, was that the decon spaces were causing everything to get bigger, and then their bedrooms were too far away. So they did an actual study and proved that it was closer. So that's been our thing. And if we're putting those living quarters upstairs, you can't do a fire station without giving them the ability to grill outside. It's a given in every fire department across the country. So we try to create those patios. If it was on the ground floor, it'd be an outdoor patio, but upstairs it becomes the party.
Yeah, if there's no grilling spot, I'm gonna get stabbed, so make sure there's a grilling spot on there.
We don't want that.
And again, it has the training tower and
Just out of curiosity, how much cost increase is it to have the elevated hose tower with the training facility in it? Ballpark.
To take it off completely,
Yes.
$250,000.
Okay.
But it's cheap money for the kind of training you get out of those towers when you put them on.
Station 2, the satellite station, a little bit smaller. Single story.
Any cost benefit to us, Dave? 2 stories? You go with the smaller single-story building?
Cost benefit, so you assume that you have all the same square footage. It goes back to that question of now we're just stacking those living quarters down on the ground. So if you assume that, then the only added cost is that elevator and the area in the calculation for the stairs.
Is an elevator required?
Elevator is not
For a-
required if it's not public access.
That's the question, is it required because it's not?
It is required if it is occupied space. So if the living quarters are upstairs,
You will need it.
you will need it. The federal law
Really?
does not
I'm gonna-
excuse firefighters.
I mean, there has to be something a way around it, because I do know of a fire station with a second story that, as long as was fire department personnel only and there was no public access, they did not have to put in the elevator. Most recently built within the last 8 years.
We have heard of departments convincing themselves of this. But it is a federal law that if it is occupied space, it must be built to be accessible. I'm hoping that department you're referring to put a shaft in to add a future elevator. If any public ever go up there for any reason, then you have to provide access. So if you give tours, then you have to have an elevator.
And that's been a big conversation in the state for a long time, because fire stations generally, it's a public building, but the living quarters, the thought process and the thought process was the living quarters and the off restricted access
The
zones
suppression
were
stuff.
only for
There's
staff who are physically capable of.
Yes, there are several organizations, the police and the sheriff's departments also have these conversations about you have to be physically fit to do what you do. But there are no exceptions to this in ADA. In laws that created ADA, there are no exceptions that say just because you have to be physically fit that you don't have to provide that access. A firefighter, what I would say about this is that a firefighter who sprains his knee and now he can't get up those stairs, he could sue you because he cannot get access to spaces that he should have access to. It's that simple.
Sprinkler systems required for fire stations?
That is driven by code requirements. We did one 2 years ago that was small enough that it slid under the requirement. And we talked to them a lot because we don't think it's a good idea to have your fire station not having the sprinkler systems that you're telling everybody else they really, really ought to have. But they chose not to put one in. So you can get around it, but your program right now says that you're going to be.
Is it limited by size?
It's a size equation. So,
Okay.
yeah, you're too big. Both of your stations would be too big.
What is ours, 12,000 square feet? No, I think the
What we-
code here is
One was
12,000
21.
square
Yeah,
feet.
we're,
Oh,
so
I
one would be, one based off of the committee's recommendations, we'd have one that was over that recommendation.
Anybody have any other questions about the presentation?
how much is an elevator?
The elevator itself is probably 80 to 100,
Okay,
but you have to put the shaft in and a pit. I mean, it's 100 to 150 with all the accessories,
And
the
the 2 stairs.
the stairs. Yeah.
What about barometric elevators versus hydraulic? You never seen one? They're essentially glass tubes that work on barometric pressure.
like a drive-in tube?
Not in a commercial, I've not seen one in a commercial setting.
A person size one.
If there ain't safety factors and some sort of a cable holding my fat butt up in that thing, I ain't going up in it.
I think they.
I've
Why do
seen,
you think a cable's
I've seen what
Because
they
there
call
are brakes on it too.
lift-evators, which is, kind of a watered-down version of an elevator. They're just very small and they're kind of single person. And those are more often than not used as a retrofit for a building that needs to be ADA compliant, but I've not seen what you're speaking of in a commercial setting.
Yeah, I haven't, that's why I was asking
More
if
things.
there's a commercial version,
More
because I know
things.
there's ADA.
Is there a couple more things in this
No.
slide?
I just wanted to point out
We
the slide
either,
Mark
they're
was talking
either,
about.
the ones that we see commercially are either less hydraulic, or the ones where you're pulling them from the top. Those are typically the ones we see commercially.
That's a big scare we've heard from
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the slide Mark was talking about. The dinghy is called original contract and the boat is called change order.
And our antidote to that is doing it as an open book and pledging to give you money back instead of kind of keeping that image alive and well in our, we don't think it really has a place in our world, and we try to provide a process that eliminates that, as the ultimate goal.
There's a contractor who manages to get a good portion of the road building bids in Michigan. And what they do is they bid the contract as let, and the state almost always assumes perfect conditions. So do they.
No, it's still.
And what they do then is they put in there as a contingency that any additional sands, fills, blah, 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 costs more money. And they always win because they get the lowest bid. But then when it comes time to do the job, they have to add all these other parts. And that's what he's getting at with change orders. Because you have to be
It's
careful with watching.
it's actually where the money is made in construction.
Right.
It's not on the original bid. They're being as competitive as they can be. They're giving you the best price. And where the money is made is in the after markup.
The other thing that we do is we spend a lot of time pre-qualifying anybody that we're going to work with. We look at financials, we look at bonding capability, we look at safety record, we look at their banking records, we look at a bunch of different factors, and we'll talk to you. Who are contractors you'd recommend we use? Who are some you'd recommend we stay away from? And we go through all of that, and so we vet them before we bid out to them.
And reputation is a big part of that too. If they're kind of a low bid, high change order type of a contract, they might not be the right one for the project. But on the same token, we want to be fair.
Right.
Fairness is what creates a good deal. And if we treat our contractors as our partners and a valuable part of our team, help us out, costing in the front, then we're going to be able to be less concerned that they're going to try and take advantage of us later on by having a good team relationship. Because I truly believe that if something wasn't known, and it's clear that it's something, maybe the sound, maybe there's more sand on the site or a sinkhole, whatever it is, if no one could tell without having Superman on their team to look under the ground, what's fair is fair, and you want to have a fair deal, you want to have a good relationship, because that ultimately will give you the best price and the best way to keep a project under control. I have seen where contractors get very aggressive, everything's in change order, and the relationships fall apart. And then they go from small change orders to big, to big, to big. And then before you know it, attorneys are involved, and then who wins? The people that are the attorneys, and we're trying to get away from that scenario. We don't like that. It was a great question
The
to
attorney
ask.
always wins.
You don't
Yeah,
want to,
that's all, the only one who wins is the attorneys.
Well, I think the key here is that you guys supply the quote, perfect design. I mean, that's ultimately what you're trying to do. The contractors will bid the perfect design, and then it works. If you leave a lot of gaps and then the contractor gets into a position where he goes, whoa, then that's where those change orders come from. I think that you demonstrated very well that you're thorough in every detail, so I think that's something that.
another big part of having contractors involved in the front end of the project is, number one, they feel a sense of involvement. Their knowledge is coming to the table, and we check our egos at the door. We invite those people to be part of it. Let's make sure that what we design really is the best, the most constructible, the most efficient, and so on and so forth. Leverage their knowledge. By being involved up front, they actually know more about the project and can give a better price because they know more about the project.
They see
So-
less risk.
So
Risk is money.
if
risk
we,
costs money.
if we missed a door on the plans, Mike wouldn't do that, but if we missed a door, they knew the door was there, right? They were part of our team. They understood it. We did some estimates together. We said there's 22 doors, not 21. That sense of involvement helps you get through a project.
I just wanted to check with our folks on the phone. You guys still there? Jim, Robbie? Did you have anything you wanted to add at this point? I think we're past our time.
No, I think it was great listening in, and we were able to hear all of your concerns. Even though we couldn't really talk up at any time, but it was great to listen in and hear everything. And look forward to meeting everyone and working in the future.
Thank you. Did you have a question, Judy?
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Mine is
Thanks.
too basic.
No, not basic.
Okay, my question is, you're obviously from out of state.
Mhm.
So how does that work? How often would you be here? Is it,
During the construction phase, we will have a construction manager here full-time,
Okay.
24/7.
They
That's
just
the way we
kinda
do
move
it.
in.
They just,
Okay.
yep, we put people in the field. They will live here.
We have nomads.
Yeah, we have people that actually like that.
We have nomads. They go
Nomads.
wherever, they love
Wherever the
to
work
travel,
is.
they love to build, and they go where our projects
We
are.
will
They
have,
bring
we will
their
have people
wives.
saying, I want to build there. Put me on that team. So no, we will have people here full-time.
okay,
For the design phase, it will be as necessary. We will be here running charrettes and design sessions, and it's going to be, a lot of it's going to be subject to your availability, because we really need your input to do this process right. So
So what is the average? Are we paying that cost then of putting them up for that time? What would that-
It's
what is
built
that?
in.
it's built into the overall project.
Do you guys, during the construction phase, is it weekly construction meetings, or is it?
Every week.
Every week.
Every week.
There's typically a safety meeting every week, and then there's typically a construction meeting every week.
And as much as you'd like to manage a project using those wonderful schedules we put together, we really manage a project 2 weeks at a time. Because the most clarity you can get in anything is 2 weeks out. We always know what we're looking to do, but we have a meeting every week and we want to know exactly what happened last week. Did we get where we wanted to be? And if not, what are we going to do this week? And then what do we have planned to back that week up? And our experience is that moving 2 to 3 weeks really helps you get to the end game without having to say, oh no, we're a month away and we're 75% done. So we're keeping track of it on a weekly basis, just as you.
If there's a successful millage vote, is the anticipation to do 2 buildings at one time, 1 building, then 1 building? What's your thoughts?
My thought, we built our schedule assuming we would do them simultaneously, but you could parcel them out and do one at a time. You could do both at the same time. That actually, from a competitive position may be a really good idea to bid both of them, to get the advantage of everybody saying, wow, bigger project, I can have a more competitive price. You may actually realize a benefit having them both on.
So
One of the issues,
Real quick, so benefit to doing them separately or doing them
Together.
Okay.
Together.
Okay.
one of the issues we met with one of the neighboring departments was there were two buildings going on at once. If one project fell behind, they were going to take the same group that was working on the projects, ship them to the other building to get that stuff done, and it's worked out fairly well for them.
Well, ideally, you'd want a little bit of lag.
That's what I was just gonna say.
And I
Last
think
time I did this, we staggered.
You want the mechanical folks from this job to go right to the next
Right.
one
Yeah.
with no timeout. And I think if there's a small little lag, you're just getting really efficient, and you'll see that in the pricing because you'll have a more aggressive price. But we would want to have a schedule that had sufficient lag to allow us to do this and then move those folks to the next one and do that same thing. And
But
they
there's
could be
pieces we're
done.
gonna wanna do together.
Yep.
And that was what Springfield had done. They had, they're doing the two stations at once, and maybe it wasn't HVAC, stuff like that, but it was like the cement guys, they ran into an issue with drying of the sand at one of the stations. So they sent the guys from this one over to this station. They got the group.
It's a perfect opportunity to eliminate people doing nothing.
Right.
When you have people sitting around doing nothing, it's just
It's not-
dollars are flying out of the air. And if you can keep them mobilized, that's the trick.
Very good. Any other questions?
No, thank you.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
You know, I'm gonna back up one second to a question you asked about how often would we be here for the design. There's some new information that we didn't understand when we did that schedule. Your issue's trying to get to that May millage
Right.
thing, you know, we'll do what it takes. If we're here weekly to get that far, then if that's what it takes, then I'm pretty sure we've got that built in.
Yeah, what I was actually gonna add on to that is, although the next time we have a WebEx, we will have it nailed. We do a lot of work where we're dispersed. Our clients are in a certain location, and we bring the right people to the table that you have to have in the room to help navigate the process. And we can bring engineers in via a remote location, providing we get it right. Not that we didn't, Ken, we tried, but we would make sure that efficiently we would have that process where people are engaged and they're doing their thing, then they're out for 1 hour. They're not traveling, they're not doing anything else, they just focus on this job and then they go back to doing what they were doing, which hopefully will be this job. But we try to get that efficiency of the leadership is in control, helping you make decisions. We got our folks that are red hot on their work and they're efficiently used by virtue of that.
I could see how our first meetings, Wendell has a process that we call the immersion process, and this would be really good for that, which would be to come and spend 2 to 3 days. We've seen what your program looks like. We can do our programming effort, see how it joins up with the program, but we've already done some work on the floor plan. So one day might be about the programming, the next day is overlaying that on the planning. And then we can take that back and we'll already have a really good start on the planning and the programming from a good solid couple of days work.
And we would balance design and construction folks from day one. So if we had those early project meetings, although I'm not gonna make the best decision designing it, I'll help to make the best decision on how to build it and be able to collaborate with our designers to make good decisions in a short period of time. So we get all that out of our system quickly, aim right, and then my experience.
There's not a handoff, so everybody's up to speed. So it's not like all of a sudden 6 months from now, we're gonna throw a package to market and say, go build it.
Which is why we had those guys on the phone, so that they could hear what was said in the interview, so when we get the project, they know what
The
your folks
backstory,
is,
yeah.
What's expected.
yeah,
Nice.
are expecting to see.
All right, very good.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.